Yeah, okay, well, I think this is episode 44.
44.
And we've got a friend with us today. This is Tahe Governor. And Tahe, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show, Tahe.
I'm glad to be on the other side of the curtain. Like,
Yeah.
I get to be behind it. I've just
That's
been
right.
I've been on like this side, but now I'm like, oh, this is what's back here. So I'm very
You're back
excited
here.
to be on this side with you guys.
Yeah, it's quite
Hallelujah.
glorious on this side.
It is
man.
not. Hey, I'm just letting you guys know, if anyone ever has the chance to get on this side of the curtain, it's incredible. So definitely check it out.
Amen. Now, is it bishop or apostle, Governor?
Well, you see, back long ago, it used to be bishop apostle. Now,
Bishop
now I'm just
apostle.
barely a deacon.
You're
I've been downgraded.
Oh, that's so funny.
I'm just chief of sinners. That's
There you go.
I think we're all of that.
That's what I
yeah.
am at this point.
There you go.
Lord have mercy.
Well, Tahe has a couple of YouTube channels, but the reason we brought him on is because of one particular one. We can talk about the other one if you want.
Yeah.
Your video game channel.
We'll start with like the main channel that you guys have brought me on for, which, I mean, you can call it a channel if you would like. It's in development. It's under construction. But my hope is that this will reignite just the fire and the flame to finish making the upcoming episodes for everything. But yeah,
Well,
who knows? Maybe someone's listening to this.
You know your channel's
that?
really good when you only have. Well, how many videos do you have on that channel?
Oh my God! Are you talking about the one, like the making decide? Oh, I only have one video. That's it.
So
I got
one
It's just the
video
one.
on one channel has gotten you a podcast episode of your own. Look at that. So who knows what's going to happen when you get 3 or 4 episodes on
That's
there?
a good point. Hey,
You're going
look,
straight to
yeah, I
Rogan
think-
after that.
That's a great. Hey, if anyone needs to be encouraged to just put, just to get the episode out there, let this be encouragement.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah,
After
that's
only
motivation.
posting one episode, I'm already being invited to speak on.
Behind the curtain, yeah.
Well, now this is gonna spoil me, because then I'm gonna release the second episode and be like, "Where are the invites at?"
Yeah,
Like,
there's
come
not-
on.
yeah, we'll have you back on.
Okay, great.
You'll have to come back. But you got to put out another episode now because people are just going to flock to you. So
Right,
Well,
they're going
I
to be
mean,
looking
look,
for it.
At the current rate that I'm going, that means that I should be on this podcast with you guys, like, I don't know, twice a year or something like that. So,
hey, you got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the one
yeah.
video you have is really good. And so your topic is discipleship.
yeah.
Discipleship. So why don't we just start off with why that topic? Is it something in your background or just an interest or what? Like, why that topic? Why make videos about it? And then we can go from there.
Yeah. So, I think some of this will, Ryan, you'll know some of the like parallels with some of my story with this, but I think what it really plays into is I didn't grow up as a Christian, didn't grow up in a Christian household. God saved me when I was 15 years old. And so even though I was in the South, and even though I'm, in the South in America, not South America, but in the southern part of the United States of America,
But
I really had no exposure to church, the Bible, biblical teaching. So when God saved me when I was 15, I really was approaching it from very like fresh eyes, and everything is brand new to me, and I don't get anything that's being said, and I don't necessarily have like a lot of denominational baggage that I'm bringing to the table. And so as I'm trying to understand what it means to follow Jesus and to live after him and be a follower of Christ, you come to this very important moment, or at least in church at the time I'm picking up that it's a very important moment. And that's Jesus telling his disciples to go and make disciples. And it's being taught to me, this is the Great Commission. I'm later hearing that that's what it's called, right? This is the Great Commission. This is the mission that Jesus gave to his disciples, and this mission's being carried on, and we are to carry on this mission. And so I remember as I would hear that being taught, I was given kind of frameworks of what that looked like, frameworks of what that meant. Because again, I don't know a ton, so I'm very dependent on the church that I'm a part of and the leaders of that church to help me. Like, okay, that's good, but like, what does this actually mean? And what does this look like? And so I'm in a zeal of wanting to live for God, wanting to serve God. I was putting application in a way that it was formed to me. It was like, this is what it means to go make disciples, and this is what it looks like. But the more I started just learning the scripture on my own, learning the Bible on my own, I just had to start being honest with myself that I just did not know what a lot of these words meant, what a lot of these terms meant, but I understood the importance of them. Like, these things have a lot of gravity. Like, if Jesus really is telling his disciples to go make disciples, that's something I should do, and I want to participate in that, but I will only be able to do it well enough to the degree that I actually understand what he's angling at. So, to summarize, I agree with the emphasis and the importance of that mandate. And it's something that I hear a lot of churches talk about, a lot of Christians talk about, a lot of pastors talk about, especially in this kind of like non-denominational evangelical space, which is, an influence of the, church culture that I was a part of. I hear a lot of people talking about it, but I actually wanted to get under, like, okay, but what does that really mean? And kind of the last example I'll give before you guys can ask any follow-up questions. It's like Matthew chapter 6, when Jesus tells the crowd he's teaching, he says, seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you. And I remember hearing that taught often, but after it'd be taught, it would, like, after that scripture would be shared at like a church or something, the application was like, so read your Bible first thing in the morning and, like, pray and stuff. But then I would be thinking, I'm like, yeah, so I'm gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna seek first his kingdom. But then I would sit back and think, like, wait, these people didn't have like a Bible that they could read every morning. And these, like, is that what he was really saying? Like, go have quiet time and go do devotions. Like, is that what did he mean that? So I, like, can read this and acknowledge this is important. Like, Jesus is saying, seek first the kingdom. He's giving a command. Like, this is a big deal. And I want to live this out. I want to embody it. I want to follow it. But I'm finding myself applying it in ways that are being filtered through someone's own worldview and understanding. And I just want to get under, when Jesus said this to that group of people, what was in his mind? What was in their mind? What would they have understood? Because I feel the closer I can get to that, not that these teachings aren't good, not that anybody's being manipulative or like trying to preach heresy or be false teachers, but the more I can align myself with what was in the mind of Christ and in the mind of the people, the more that I can have a fidelity to what is under this teaching and applying it well. So that's ultimately the motivation behind it. Discipleship has been an important part of my life. What it means to be a disciple has been an important part of my life following Christ. So I just want to invite other people into that journey with me as I'm wanting to uncover and get under what is here when Jesus uses this term to his people.
Yeah, that's good. Because as you were saying that, I was thinking that that's true. Like, wherever you grew up, like in the South, a lot of people grew up Catholic, you got Baptist, you got non-denominational, you got all these different groups. And depending on who you ask, being a disciple is going to mean something completely different. So the question, like you said, is what does it mean when Jesus said it? Like, what was he doing? And then what were his disciples doing up until the point where we have now all these people that, are Christians, and all these different definitions of the word disciple. So, yeah. So obviously the kind of the funny question, the follow-up is like, so is it having a spiritual authority, like, is it having somebody tell you what to do? I remember just a funny story. I remember being, growing up in a non-denominational church. And when I got to that age where I was really involved, people used to complain that, hey, they make a lot of rules and they're just trying to control me. And one of the leaders told us, I mean, if we could control you, like, would that be so bad? Like, you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't do this. And it was kind of funny at the time, but then it's like, okay, but we're still going off of this person's definition of what you should and shouldn't do. So, so what does that mean? Like, what would being a disciple look like? Does it mean following a person, or does it mean something broader?
I think we should speak to also, like, just the disconnect on so many levels that we have in the Western church, like the Western American evangelical matrix, if you will. It's almost like coming out of the matrix, like, oh, wait a minute, like, this doesn't mean, and this doesn't look like what I thought it was. And, especially when you get into like some of the divine council worldview and stuff that we've really tapped into. But like, waking up to that stuff is shocking. And man, I didn't really think about it too much until I watched your video, and I was like, yeah, what does discipleship really mean? Like, we have this idea of what it means, but that might not be it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think I talked about this in the one video that's currently on my channel. Who knows? Maybe by the time you listen to this episode, dear listener, there'll be hundreds of it. It'll be a library at that point.
We're
But
praying
as
for
of
it.
now, we're hoping for it. One of the things I bring up is that for a lot of people, and I'm sure this has all been our journey at some point, right? You want to understand like what the text is saying, right? You want to get under it. And so you take that next step, right? The question being asked, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, just to answer that question from a very like surface way, you want to know what it means. And so, you go to blueletterbible.org or .com, whatever it is, right? You put like an interlinear and
BLB.
you're like, okay, like that, it's written in Greek. Like that's the language that's under the New Testament. So what's the Greek word? So you find the Greek word and then you click on it and, because you're doing Bible study and I'm laughing about it. And that's great. Like, I feel like that's just like such a great first step for people when they're really trying to get into study and doing word study. But as I continue to explain an issue with that, we'll see one of the fatal flaws. So the word itself is simple. It's straightforward. The Greek word under disciple is mathetes. When Jesus says make disciples, that's the verb form. So it's mathetuo. But the word, by itself, disciple, it just means student. It just means pupil. It just means learner. It's a term that just would be used in everyday Greek language and Greek culture, Greek society. So already one of the important things to know is like this term, this word, it's not like this special term or this special word. Usually when you hear the term today, it's uniquely being used oftentimes by Christians, those in the church world, to refer to followers of Jesus. This isn't, saying a disciple. That's not something we would commonly say, but a lot of people would say they're a student, they go to school, whatever. So the simple answer is, well, what is a disciple? And, what is make disciples? It is disciple means student, and to make disciples means to make students, make learners, right? So, but that actually, I think, is what ends up getting us into a lot of trouble. That clarity actually gives a veil of understanding that makes you think, okay, I'm grasping it, because the moment I say it means student, it means to become a student, to make a student, to be a student. Our mind then goes, oh, I know what that is. I know what a student is. I'm a student. I've been a student. And so we immediately then start infusing it with our cultural background, all of the cultural baggage of what we believe a student is, what a student looks like, how a student behaves. And what we end up missing is that when Jesus is using that phrase, in the same way, we have ideas loaded in our mind, right? I say student, you immediately think classroom. You think teacher, you think of a school, you think of sitting in rows, you think of being in a chair, you think of teacher monologuing, dictating, notes. If you talk, you raise a hand. It's a very sterile, controlled environment where there is a particular subject or topic that is being taught. And the way it's being taught is through the teacher as the arbiter, the holder of knowledge. And the goal is for them to get information from their mind into your mind so that you are able to pass a test, get a grade, so that you can graduate and move on to the next thing, the next level, the next course, right? That just floods our mind. And all I said was student. So then what we have to get under is when Jesus said that word to his disciples, the same thing happens in their mind. However, it's a much different picture of what happens to them. They don't think of a school and they don't think of the teacher at the front monologuing, the rows and the tables and the chairs and the desks, and you're sitting in rows and you got to sit there quietly and you're raising your hand and the teacher is holding all the knowledge and they need to take a test. That's not what's going into their head. So on one level, it's a simple answer. What is a disciple? It's a student. What does it mean to make disciples? Make students. But on another level, it's a completely complicated answer because now we need to understand what was a student to them when they are using that term and that word and that idea and that concept. What does that look like? And there's a little bit of a comparison here. Like I know people who even schools in different cultural contexts look different, and even in different countries. Like I have friends that are from different European countries, and when they talk about school, it's like this small group of 3 or 4 people that like they journey almost like K through 12 all the way with, and it's just like 3 or 4 other people, where other people have been homeschooled. And so when they think of school, it looks very different versus someone who goes to, maybe a public school in a major, city or state, like somewhere in Texas, where you're talking about classes of thousands of people, graduating classes and individual classes of potentially 100, plus students. So even on a local level, this stuff can look a little bit different. So what we want to do is we want to step back even further and get under that thing, what it meant for them. So before I, just kind of started tirading into all of that, and we can get under that education system, any thoughts or any reflections you guys want to add? And then if so, whenever you guys are kind of ready for me to start spooling all that out, we can go there. I just wanted to pause real quick though and see if there's any thoughts or reflections from you guys.
Yeah, just right off the top of my head is just, man, like when we do study the Bible, we've got to be aware of those preconceived ideas that we have in our heads as modern people. And really, this whole podcast started from, what is the biblical culture and history? What were they thinking? What were they, what was being communicated to them? Because we've heard the saying, that the Bible is written not for us, but to us. So we definitely want to know what the original hearers were understanding. Because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we don't have the ideas that they had in their minds, we're not going to interpret the scriptures properly. We're going to have our own ideas, and our ideas are not the ideas of what they had. So we're not gonna do it correctly. And, God has grace with that. We're not doing it on purpose. It's just we got to unlearn what we've learned and learn what they did.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you mentioned Googling the Greek words or Blue Letter Bible or whatever, because, again, when I was a teen,
deep Bible study.
Yeah. I thought I was so cool. I had one of the parallel Bibles that had like 4 translations in it.
Yeah.
And when I found out about Blue Letter Bible, I could look up the words, and I was like, I'm doing it. I'm going to know everything.
Yep.
And then,
I'm a scholar.
Yeah. But it's just like you said, like and we talked in the episode before this, I think is us with Mike Chu talking about the same thing. Like even when you look at a word in the Greek or Hebrew or whatever, you're still thinking with your English brain.
Yeah.
And so it's still going to mean something different. And
exactly.
And so the context is everything. So why don't you go ahead? And I hope that we're not stealing any thunder from your next episode. Don't give too much away.
No, I'm gonna give it all because if anything, again, this is good. I want to get it out. It needs to live in a condensed form. That way, if people don't want to just listen to me droll on for hours. So no, I will definitely gladly give it. Something else just real quick is, you guys were setting up some of those thoughts. Two things came to mind. One, Ryan, you'll know what I'm talking about. But Josh, you'll still appreciate this, though, you may not have ever been in the room. Ryan and I both, there was a pastor that we know that would often talk about like the Holy Spirit in Acts and how the word for the power of the Spirit was dunamis. And so, but the correlation they would make is that dunamis, that's the word we get dynamite from. And then they would just go back to the text and then be like, so God wants to give you dynamite power. And it's like, wait, no, like just because we later are using that term, but no one, when Christ is talking, no one is thinking of a stick of dynamite. Like, these are first century Jews, right? And another one, that we'll do this with, it's even like this idea, and this is something that a lot more Christians, I think, can connect with and understand. When we talk about worship and we say worship, it's kind of ingrained in the evangelical thought space. We immediately think of a slower tempoed music that is written to God. And then you kind of raise your hands, you close your eyes. But for like the Jewish people, worship meant sacrifice. It meant like we're killing something. Like where do we burn this thing? And so, it's just even little things like that. And so whenever the scripture talks about like worship, talks about praise, it talks about these things. They're not thinking of, okay, let's put on a fast song. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with an act of worship or a kind of worship being singing to God and pouring out your heart through music. Again, I'm not like saying that's false teaching and, we're completely misapplying the Bible and, it's like, no, calm down. But if anything, it's like, that's all good. I want to just know more. I want to know better. Kind of like whenever Ananias and Sapphira, who was it? I think like Apollos, they pulled to the side, they heard him preaching, and they just wanted to show him. They weren't like, you're a heretic. They just, hey, we just feel like there's like a better way to look at this, that if anything, it'll just add more layer and nuance to what it is that you're already doing. So because we kind of, set the ground there, let's kind of step back and what did this term mean for, Jesus and the disciples at that time? Well, something that a lot of people may not know is that the idea of being a disciple and making a disciple, this is not a Christian construct. Jesus did not come to institute a new title, a new thing that you could become. He's actually borrowing from an established practice that has been instantiated from the Jewish people. So this is a practice, and this is an entire educational framework that the Jewish people are developing during Second Temple period Judaism. And so it's in that kind of cultural moment that the Jewish people start to formalizing how they instruct and how they teach and train young children in knowing Yahweh and embracing their story and their heritage and their identity as not just the Jewish people, but God's chosen people, and how that fits in this larger cosmic drama that's playing out. And so during the Second Temple period, for anyone who may not be familiar with that language, there was a time in the Jewish history where they built a temple. That temple was destroyed. And so then later on in the Jewish story, you see this as you even read through the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, they are then able to rebuild the temple. And so they rebuild the temple. And so we enter into a period, Protestants would also know this as the intertestamental period, from the end of Malachi to the beginning of the book of Matthew. So there's some overlap. The timelines don't map perfectly on each other with Second Temple period Judaism and intertestamental period, because the Second Temple is built within, like, towards the tail end of that Hebrew Bible narrative, right, that's being told. But for the most part, there's a lot of overlap in the timeline there. So you can effectively use those terms interchangeably. But it's in that cultural moment after the Second Temple is built, but before it's then destroyed later, and it's destroyed after the death of Jesus, about 40 years after Christ dies. So during that period, there is this formalization and this development of the Jewish education system. And there's a reason why this is happening. The reason why this is happening, and it's important to kind of understand some of the Jewish history that's bringing us to this moment that they now find themselves in. During the Second Temple period is a time of great oppression to the Jewish people, and a lot of geopolitical shifts and changes are happening. If any of the listeners, if you're not familiar with some of the narrative arc that's taking place throughout the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, as we're moving from that narrative into the time of Christ, what we see happening is people know about, David, he establishes the kingdom. You have Israel, it's a united kingdom. But then soon after David's rule, David has a son, Solomon. Then after Solomon, the kingdom then splits. And so you have a northern kingdom, you have a southern kingdom, is largely what it's considered. Won't get into all the specifics and the nuances of that, but just there's now the kingdom is split between north and south. And so God, as you read through some of the prophets and the kings, a lot of what's happening in these prophetic books, it's like the prophets warning the Israels, like the Israelites. He's warning them like, hey guys, like, you need to repent and you need to, like, return and follow Yahweh. If you don't, he's going to raise up nations. They're going to judge you through the sword, and they're going to destroy you. And in the same way you drove out nations to claim this land, they're going to drive you out of the land that God has given you. And so what ends up happening is they don't listen to God. They continue to rebel. And so first, the northern kingdom is wiped out. The Assyrians come in, they displace them. There's some debate over the 10 tribes. Are they lost? Are they not lost? And all that fun stuff. I'm sure you guys have had guests on, or you will have guests on to talk about all those wonderful things about the 10 lost tribes of Israel.
Sure.
All that fun stuff. But nonetheless, the Assyrians come, they take out the northern kingdom. They aren't able to take out the southern kingdom, but eventually then the Babylonians rise up. The Babylonians then were able to take down the southern kingdom and really just kind of took out that whole area, kind of like the known world at that point. The Babylonians are ruling and reigning. During this time, this is the book of Daniel, as you're reading the Babylonian captivity, all that fun stuff. And so Babylonians happen. After the Babylonians and the Persians come, The Persians come. This is still in Daniel as well, but the Persians then come. They kind of conquer the Babylonians, and then the Persians, they set up their power. But the Persians, under Cyrus, they allow the Israelites to rebuild their temple, to rebuild some walls. But then after that happened, you then have the Greeks that rise up. So then Alexander the Great comes and wipes out the Persians. Then Alexander the Great dies. And again, don't remember all these details, but I do want you to pay attention to how much change is happening, because it's going to play a significant role in the formalization of this Jewish education system. Then Alexander the Great comes, wipes out the Persian, most of the known world. He then dies. His kingdom's then split into 4 different kingdoms. So then for a period, the Ptolemies are ruling over like the Jewish people in the area that they're in. And then after the Ptolemies come the Seleucids, and then they're reigning over the area for a little bit. And then there's this Maccabean revolt, which is where the celebration of Hanukkah comes. So they kind of like push back the Seleucids for a while. But then the Romans come, and then the Romans come, and then they wipe out. So
are we going to have a test?
Yeah, you are. You're gonna. This is discipleship, Josh.
Yeah,
I'm discipling. I'm discipling you right now.
I'm gonna take notes. Yeah.
But anyway, so all this is. So this is literally like transpiring from like 700 BC. 722 is when the Assyrians wipe out the attack and displace the northern kingdom. So this is running from like 722 all the way to like nearly the birth of Christ, right? Like this is happening. So effectively over a period of like 800 years, 700 to 800 years. So while I'm explaining all of that, here's what you need to understand is living in the mind of this Jewish people, this cultural identity. A part of their narrative, their story, their heritage is that they are God's chosen people. And the promise that was given to Abraham is that God chooses Abraham. That is God's chosen people. That is God's nation. God picks Abraham, and he says, from this nation, from you, the nations of the world are going to be blessed. I'm not just the God of the Israelites. I am the God of all creation, all peoples. And my desire is to establish my kingdom, my rule and my reign over all of the created world. I'm going to use this nation. I'm going to use this man to do this. And they're feeling like they're getting some traction. They have some setbacks, but they're getting some traction. Like David comes in, this great king. He establishes the kingdom. And as the people live devoted to Yahweh and they follow his teachings and his commands and align themselves with the teachings of Torah and what it means to live that out and to walk in covenant fidelity to God and loyalty to him, like God is going to usher in this like great, this restoration of the created order. There's this, there are these hints of this messianic figure that's in the background. A lot of people don't quite know what that is and what's going on. And so this is the narrative that's living in the mind. This is kind of part of the cultural identity. But now that you know, like that's kind of in the background, now look what's happening. For the past 800 years, you've kind of been almost like the afterthought of all of these other massive geopolitical shifts. So it's not even like these people are even necessarily fighting about or worried about the Jewish people or the Israeli people. They're just like this other little kingdom tucked away. These people, it's these global empires. Once Israel falls to the Assyrians and the Babylonians, no one really cares about them that much. Even the Persians like, yeah, it's fine. You can go rebuild your stuff, whatever. And then you have the Greeks that come, and then the kingdom splits and the Romans that come. So it's in this space that they're looking at themselves and their identity, and they're like, guys, we are God's chosen people. Like we are supposed to be this set apart, consecrated, covenantal people that is living in obedience to Yahweh. His promise is that as we are loyal to him and as we follow him and obey him, through us, the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And now we're just this afterthought where we barely have land. We don't really have a sense of like, how do we ground ourselves? So imagine like that's where you have now lived. And it's in that pressure that two things start to develop in their worldview. And this will really speak to your audience, especially those who have been following you guys for a long time. A lot of the stuff that you guys are teaching and talking about in the interviews you're having, the divine counsel worldview, a lot of the conversations that come into that. I know your audience is very well acquainted with the book of Enoch and a lot of the writings that are happening. Yeah, well, guess when a lot of those writings and a lot of the theological development is taking place? During the Second Temple period, in the middle of this massive geopolitical drama that's unfolding. And what's another thing that gets developed in the midst of this Jewish educational system also gets developed. And it's not a coincidence that both of these things are happening at the same time. Because what the Jewish people now need to figure out is, how do we make sense of the narrative that we have been a part of. How do we make sense of our identity, our nation, who we are, where we fit into this cosmic world? How do we make all of this make sense? What's happening? Why are we not this great nation? Where did we go wrong? What is God up to? What is the drama that's unfolding? And then how do we get back to a place of covenantal faithfulness to Yahweh? How do we become a kind of people set apart, walking in obedience to God? Because now there's all this pressure of greater conformity. Because think about it, you're trying to maintain a sense of national identity, but you no longer really have land. Like, they have land, but it's constantly in upheaval, and it's just like a sliver of what they've known before. They no longer have a monarchy that's in place. They are every day now getting influenced by Hellenization, which was kind of capitulating to the Greek culture. So all these ideas are now flowing in from Greek thought, is now, influencing and infiltrating their culture and their society. And their actual population is very diminished. And it's been like this for hundreds of years. So an analogy that I'll kind of weave in, I'll take a little pause, let you guys throw in some thoughts, and then I'll kind of further from there get into the actual Jewish educational system. But I think it's important to have all this living in your head, because if you just think about, again, even if you understand the Jewish educational system, like even if you get it, again, it's going that layer under that. If you don't understand culturally and theologically what is motivating them to start these schools, because they didn't start this system in a vacuum. They weren't just like this nation, everything was great, they were living their lives, and they were just like, hey, we need to start some schools. Because that's what we would think. We'd like, yeah, don't nations have schools? Like, we got schools, they got schools, everybody's starting schools.
Yeah.
This is happening in response to what's happening around them. And so we got to get under what are the cultural influences, because then we'll be able to go, okay, so that's what's going on in this process, in this cultural context of making disciples. As all of this is taking place and they feel all of these pressures, an analogy that I like to give people is like, imagine, all of us on this call right now, maybe if you're listening, this doesn't apply to you, but for us, we are Americans, right? Live in the United States of America. We're born here. We're from here. And so with it comes a lot of narratives and ideas of what it means to be an American, what values are attached to that, what's the cultural identity that's there. So then imagine if all of a sudden a nation comes in and ransacks us, right? And then all of a sudden we find ourselves getting displaced, we find ourselves in other locations, or just our entire nation gets just taken over and occupied by another nation. Our population goes from the around 330 million and it gets shut down all the way to like maybe just 3 million people, right? Massive population decline, no more government, no more political power influence whatsoever. There's just groups of us kind of scattered in the midst of all of this. Our forms of identity, our rhythms, the things that we just kind of naturally flow with and we think of us being Americans, it's just kind of all been wiped away. So then you'd be kind of confronted with like, what does it really mean to be an American? Like what does that mean? And do we try to hold on to that? Do we give up? Do we assimilate? So now you're thinking of it in a way that you like know what America is. You've lived in America, and now and then all of a sudden this takeover has happened. Now imagine that the takeover has happened, but now extend yourself 800 years into the future. And now you're just hearing stories about there was this great nation. It was called America. We were a superpower. We had this great economy. Like, you don't even have memories of, oh yeah, because even us, if that happened to us, we would be able to think about when we were 20, when we were 10, when we'd go to the baseball game, or when we'd go to the movies, or when we remember the presidential elections and voting in one. We would be able to connect to that. America's not even 800 years old, right? So imagine you're now 800 years removed from that, and all you have are these stories and these ideas and these texts that are written and kind of scattered across, and fighting for this. And people are telling you, right? You got, great, grandfather, like, oh yes, we were God's chosen people. We're supposed to be this great nation. We had this great king. You can see them be like, really, bro? Like, is that really true? And how do you maintain that? How do you keep that? So imagine now you're having children. They're removed. They never knew what it was like to be in America, but you're wanting to instill these values to them, this identity, but then they're getting kind of attracted to, well, man, this nation has this nation has that, or, they're under this oppression. And so it's just all of this push and pull. So that's the context they're finding themselves in. And it's in that place that they start developing and all this deep theological rich thought about the divine council worldview and the supernatural powers and the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. All of this is being teased out, that God is disinheriting the nations and, we're God's chosen people. But these nations that have been disinherited, the sons of God, have rebelled against God. And so these aren't just like other nations at play, because even read through the Hebrew Bible, as you're reading the Old Testament, this isn't just like purely historic, cultural, we're not just studying sociology and anthropology. These are rich with supernatural undertones. This heavily deals with idolatry, false gods, spiritual powers. And so they're trying to make sense. And they're like, wait a second, this isn't just like, oh, there's just been a war because some people are fighting and people want money or people want power. They're seeing that behind all of this, there's a supernatural drama unfolding. And they're seeing this counter movement that they now have to lean into as God's chosen people, as they're making sense of that. And so then the question goes, okay, well, what can we do to maintain that covenantal loyalty? What can we do to maintain that sense of identity? And it's from that this Jewish education system is developed. And so again, I know it's kind of like I've been dangling the carrot. It's like, all right, bro, like let's get to it. But again, it's just a lot to tease out. So before again, it moves a lot faster from here. I was telling Josh, the reason why the second episode is taking me so long because I'm scripting it out. And it's me like laying all of that out because I'm just going to do it in one episode.
Right,
but it's for me to really lay it out. It's going to take like 1 to 2 hours. Yeah. Once I lay that out, everything moves so much faster. I just think that is so important to know, to then really situate yourself in their education system and realize that even if you understand some of their systems and processes and philosophies. Again, if you just think of it like a kid going to school, like you went to school because it's just like, oh yeah, you need to get educated. You need to learn stuff. Yeah. You need to, so you can get a good job one day. No, this for them, this was like a form of spiritual warfare and resistance. This was like enlisting yourself into the military. This is like, we must resist the cosmic powers that are trying to pull us away from our fidelity to Yahweh. That's like what's driving the idea under this, which will tie directly into making the disciples. Spoiler alert. That's why Jesus in Matthew 28 says, go and make disciples of what? All nations, because this is the method that he instantiates to reclaim the nations that were disinherited in Deuteronomy 32, right? This is the plan, right? So when you start connecting, you see that thread, then you're like, oh yeah, we're not just trying to like make well-formed, well-educated people who live holy and live good and who know the Bible and who teach it and live a good moral upstanding life and go to church. You're like, oh, I'm participating in a cosmic war that is unfolding and is at play. And I am resisting the powers of darkness that are trying to inculcate me and integrate me into their way of living. And when you see that thread, then what it means to be a disciple and make a disciple, not only will you understand the education system better, but the motivation behind it and the ideas that surround it. So I'll go into that next, and it'll be very fast, I promise. But I felt like that setup was important. Quick, any thoughts or reflections from you guys?
Yeah, that's so good, Tay. That's really, really good. And it makes me think of what Dr. Heiser used to say about baptism. Like, we think baptism is just, oh, we're doing this little symbol of our faith. No, it's spiritual warfare. You're now declaring to all the unseen realm, hey, I'm switching teams. But Mike, do you remember when Mike Chu was saying, Ryan, when he was talking about the Pharisees?
Yeah,
and he said that their fear was that they were going to lose the nation again, that they were going to lose the temple, or they were going to lose and go back into captivity and all that stuff. So like they were so like gatekeeping with everything. That makes me think of that stuff.
Yeah. Because it really is. And then of course they lost everything because they denied Jesus. So there's the irony in that. But yeah, Mike Chu, his point was that when you read the Bible in context, the Pharisees are actually it's a sympathetic group. And they thought like, if we let this guy get away with this, we are going to lose everything.
Yeah.
Yes. And thinking of it that way, about like if America were to collapse for one reason or another, and 800 years later, you have people go, well, once upon a time, this was like, it really is impressive that any kind of structure can live over 800 years like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that the fact that you had, like when you read the Bible, you have Old Testament, New Testament, and the Malachi ends, and then all of a sudden Rome is in charge and the Jews are in Rome, like, in Jerusalem under Rome. And it's kind of like jumping in, like watching the first movie, skipping the sequel, and then going straight to the finale, like, where did these guys come from, So,
and I guarantee you 90% of Western Christians have no idea, have no idea of what's going on with all that history. I think that's why history is so important.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we got to do a history episode now. We'll have to do like just a
Yeah.
nitty gritty scholarship academic
Yep.
episode.
Year one.
You guys have to.
But yeah, putting that context together is really important. And that's one of the goals on this show. When we look into words like discipleship, what did it mean to them? So that's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now let me I'll get to it, right? I'll play my hand for those who've just been waiting for all of it to unfold. I love that Mike Chu was talking about that, because guess what group played the most significant role in the development of this Jewish education system? It's the Pharisees. They played the most significant role in this type of education system being established. And that's the thing, man, when you really start learning about the Pharisaic group, I like the way we cast them, and just kind of, at least in modern evangelicalism, and just make them the boogeyman of everything. You realize that, of course, Jesus subverts all groups, but at the same time, it's like the group he's kind of most like, right? Like, of all like the different Jewish groups that are there. And so
that's right.
No, I think the Pharisees get way more flack than what they should be getting. And the way that we kind of just frame them, I think, is very unhelpful to, again, better understand what's actually taking place. But neither here nor there. So what ends up taking place is that the Jewish people decide to formalize their education system, because what's also happening kind of in this cultural milieu is the Greeks are also establishing formalized schools. They're called gymnasiums. Now, when we think of gyms and gymnasiums, we think of just a place of physical fitness, of exercise and things like that.
Stinky people.
But for the Greek people, what's that?
And stinky people. I'm thinking like middle school,
locker rooms, all that stuff. Accurate. But for the Greek people, gymnasiums weren't just about physical fitness and physical. It was again almost like what the Jewish people are developing. It was these cultural training centers. You're learning philosophy. You're learning history. You're learning cultural engagement and rhetoric. Just basically any and all topics. It's the goal of it is to make like well-formed Greek citizens. So their religion's tucked in there, their theology's wrapped up in there. And again, I think that's also something that's very difficult for us to keep in mind as Western people. We very much, even those of us that are Christians, we're in the church, we love God, we still have such a hard time understanding that there is no separation between political identity, theological identity, like all of that stuff, national identity, all of that stuff is commingled. So there's no such thing as like, I'm like from this nation. Yeah. Like, but I'm separating, like it's all the same thing. It all just blends in for them. Right. So there's really not a separation with any of that stuff. So the Jewish people, as a response to that, right, these Hellenized schools are being established. They create kind of this tier system of education. So there are 3 tiers to it. You start school around 5 or 6, and it's the 3 levels are Bet Sefer, then you have Bet Talmud, and then you have Bet Midrash, which I'll talk about what all those words mean in just a moment. But whenever things start off with Bet Sefer is the school of the book, is what Bet Sefer is. And so it's a place where they take children from the ages of, or again, roughly 5, 6 years old, but let's just say from 5 to 10, both boys and girls for the most part. There's probably some variation in some of the locations where these things would be happening. And also keep in mind, this is happening around synagogues. That's the location that these things would be taking place. So it's an education system roughly that you'd start from the ages 5 to 10. And the goal of it was learning Torah. So specifically the first 5 books of the Bible. You're committing most of it to memory. For people who don't know, they don't have blueletterbible.org that they can go to. They don't have Bibles back at home. So if you wanted to study Torah, you needed to go to the synagogue. And if you wanted to really lean into knowing Torah, you had to memorize it. It was just the only way. So they would go to Bet Sefer from ages like 5 to 10. And they would learn Torah. After they would finish up Bet Sefer, what would happen is if you were, for at this point, most girls would just completely transition out of the education system and would focus on training with mom back at home, with being a homemaker and some of the trades and the skills and the crafts that the women were doing culturally at that time. And then for the young boys, you would begin working a trade with your dad and with your father, because after you got past Bet Sefer, it became a question of, did you have the chops to make it through these next tiers of education? If you didn't have the chops to make it through, then you would just go work with your dad. You would, whatever the family trade was, you would go do that. Around the age of 18, you'd get married. But it was basically like, cool, like you made it this far, but you didn't make it all the way. And it's also important to know there's a massive, again, kind of as I've laid out the cultural context to this, there's a lot of pressure to do well. There's like, you want to do good at these schools. Again, we think as modern, like Western American people, like little parents with their kids, like, baby, I just want you to be happy. I want you to find whatever gives you meaning and purpose in life. And it's like, no, these are much more like Eastern culture. And if you know anything about Eastern culture and education and achievement and working hard, even to this day, for a lot of Eastern people from Eastern cultures, it's like, no, like we want you to do well. We want you to crush it. And then if you don't make it, like that's a sting on the family. Like, it's a thing of dishonor, crap. Like we really thought you were going to crush it. Because making your way through this education system, that was like the highest honor, that you would make it all the way through the different tiers that we're going to talk about. So then you move to Bet Talmud, and Bet Talmud, which Talmud is the school of learning, is what that's called, school of learning. So in Bet Talmud, in the school of learning, now you would just go beyond the Torah and you would learn the entire Tanakh, the entire Hebrew Bible. So you would study all of the books. And by this point, it would go from ages about 10 to 13, some up to 15, but typically around 10 to 13. And at this point, this is where you start talking about a lot of young kids having the Torah committed to memory, if not most of the entire Hebrew Bible committed to memory at this point, at this level. But not only are you learning written Torah, you're also learning oral Torah. For the Pharisees, there was the tradition of not just written Torah, but oral Torah as well. And they believed that both of those were authoritative. So we see this, like this is when Jesus is correcting the Pharisees on some of their oral teaching. If you look at what Jesus says they're teaching people, you're not going to find that in the written Torah because it's a part of their oral Torah tradition. And as much as people would want to like give the Pharisees heat for that, Jesus also says in Matthew that the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, which is the oral teaching role. Like that's the seat. And he does say you should do as they say. So again, like we give the Pharisees all this heat, but you just need to see the full picture that's there. So in this, you're also learning oral Torah. And again, this is happening in the synagogue. But not only are you learning that, you're now also learning, and this is what I love more than anything, you are learning how to ask questions and how to debate with your teacher. Because a huge part of the Jewish culture and how the Jews learn, and this is from what I've heard, this is even seen in Jewish culture to this day, and how they do education to this day, that it is an active part of learning. Is if you just sit and keep your mouth shut and just take notes and regurgitate, you are seen as like a failure. That's called the sponge. And that is not a value to them. They value not the sponge, but the sieve. And what the sieve does is the sieve sits there, it listens to the teacher, but then the sieve is like, but wait a second, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, doesn't this passage say this? Well, then how does that make sense? And that is a value. You are showing them gold. The best analogy I give people that I can think of, not that this is like the best analogy, it's the best one I can think of, that we typically understand, because because most of us, We have no representation of that in our life whatsoever. Could you imagine a teacher applauding you because you started debating with them in class? No, if you debate with a teacher in class, what are you? You're insolent, you're rebellious, you're disruptive, you're causing a problem. So what's like the best parallel I think that a Western American could still get? I think the best analogy would be like those movies where you have like the young, like the young apprentice who wants to learn how to fight with swords, or he wants like to learn kung fu. And so he fights with the master, and it's showing he's immature when the master just keeps beating him. But when is the master proud of him? It's like the scene they're fighting with the sword, and then he gets the sword right to the master's neck, right? And then the master's like, yes, like you've attained, right? Like, you know,
it's funny because we see that as, or I do. I was taught that that's super disrespectful to like stand up to, you know, stand up
exactly.
to authority, especially in church. But
especially in church. But for them, again, it's like I feel like, because again, none of us are going to have any connection with the idea, and many of us as teachers. So not only do people are like the idea of giving that, also people as teachers don't want to receive that, right? Because again, we've been so embedded with that. So imagine you're trying to teach and someone's like, wait a minute.
It's very much like, I worked hard to get up here in front of y'all. Like, you're going to listen to me.
Exactly. Because like, yeah, like this is the work I put in. So that's why I'm like, I think the best analogy is like those movie scenes, because we all get that movie scene, right? You're fighting the teacher, you're deflecting their blows. The point of it isn't to let the teacher keep beating you with the sword. The point is that you would one day best your teacher and like, okay, now you've attained the level that I want you to get to. Mm-hmm. And so that is what they're doing. So this kind of adds some context. In the gospel story where Jesus is lost and left behind, and they go back and Jesus is in the synagogue and he's roughly around 12 years old and he's debating and asking questions and he's engaging with the teachers. We read that and we're like, look at that prodigy. And again, it's hinting at the fact that yes, like there is something unique that's there, but at the same time, what he's doing is normal. What he's doing is common. He was doing it at a more pointed degree, maybe with more clarity. Again, there's a hint of that there. But for the most part, what Jesus was doing is what any 12-year-old boy would have done. They would be in synagogue and they would be engaging with the teachers, debating with them, speaking with them, because that was normal. That was normal for them. So that's them learning oral Torah. That's going to be that ages 10 to 12. So then when you move on, or 10 to 13, when you move on from that, that moves you into Bet Midrash. What's believed is happening in Bet Midrash, and this is going to start around, again, some schools would end at slightly different times, but around the age of 15. What would happen, Bet Midrash at that point, you would then shift to, Bet Midrash was a place where anybody could come and learn at synagogue, but they would pull people off to the side. And you would begin to go into even more focused, devoted study. You were one of the best. You made it through these other tiers. Now they're pulling you off to the side and they're working with you even more. But now they're getting into a lot of like their, for the Jewish people, there's all these like legal interpretations that they want to teach and want you to learn. Like now we have things when people hear about things like the Mishnah and the Talmud. These are things that came later in rabbinic Judaism, but they are written down forms of what was being taught in Bet Midrash, ultimately, in some of the oral Torahs. And so they're learning legal interpretations. They're just learning how, again, because for the Jewish people, they don't just like learn the Bible and here's the rest of your life. The scripture is the foundation and the grounding for all of life. So they're learning all of that stuff. Once you made it through those tiers, if you kept making your way through all of those tiers and you're learning all of it, you then had the possibility to be taken on by a rabbi. And a rabbi was someone who was high level. They were itinerant. They would travel and they would teach, but a rabbi was one who had disciples. That's what a rabbi was. And only the best of the freaking best made it to that level. You had to go through Bet Sefer, had to go through Bet Talmud, had to go through Bet Midrash. You needed to know the scriptures really well. And a rabbi, and what you would do, you would find a rabbi that you really liked, and you would go to the rabbi and you would want them to take you on. And then what the rabbi would do is the rabbi would start grilling you. They would start debating with you. They would start engaging with you. You had to show them that you had what it took to be taken on by them. And then from the ages of like 18 up to 30, you followed your rabbi as a disciple. The term that's used within the Jewish culture is the Talmud. The Talmud is the disciple, and the Talmudim, that's the group of disciples. So the Talmud would follow the rabbi. Because again, when we talk about mathetes, that's a Greek term. These are Greek words. But for them, for the Jewish people at that time talking, it would have been the Talmud. And so you're a Talmud to a rabbi. And at this point, what you do is you follow your rabbi. And your rabbi is not just simply teaching you Torah. They are showing you how Torah and the scriptures, how it's been integrated into all of their life. You travel with them, you go places with them. And this was the highest honor. This was like, dude, if you made it to this, parents were celebrating you. This was incredible because rabbis were people of significant status. And you knew there are some scholars that believe, David Bivin is one of them. He's written on this topic. Some scholars believe that around the time of Christ, as far as rabbis who had disciples, there was only roughly about 30 of them. And Jesus would have been one of those 30. So this also sheds a little bit of context as well. We think about Jesus as like, when we look at his life, we see like this life of faith. This life of like, he's just out there, traveling from village to village, just by faith and like, just, trusting God. No, Jesus was a rabbi. And the reason why people were freaking out is because anytime a rabbi came to your town to teach, what a rabbi would do is they'd bring their disciples with them and the rabbi would be teaching their disciples. However, if they were in the open, you could come and gather around, but they weren't teaching the crowd. They were teaching the rabbi, but you got their disciples, their Talmudim, but you got to listen in on it. And anytime an itinerant rabbi came by, you stopped everything you were doing to go listen to that rabbi because you wanted to hear them teach. You wanted to hear them talk. We then also look at the disciples and we're like, these great men of faith, they left everything behind. And it's like, yeah, because a freaking rabbi told you to come follow them. That's any of us would have done that. Like anybody would have left it all to go and do that because that's a big deal. So you start seeing that, what's happening in the text. Again, not that God is not supernaturally doing things, but for a Jewish audience, they're reading it like, yeah, Jesus was a rabbi. The disciples were Talmudim, but there are other subversive things happening that we don't pick up. Here's one of the subversive elements. You always sought out the rabbi to choose you. And if the rabbi chose you, he would literally say, follow me. That is what the rabbi would say when you would be chosen to be one of his. But you had to go to rabbi and prove yourself to rabbi. What do we see Jesus doing instead? Yeah. Not only does Jesus go and seek out his Talmudim, what he also does is he's finding people that are what? They're fishermen, they're working jobs. What does that mean? It means they didn't have the chops to make it all the way through the school. They failed out, basically. They couldn't make it all the way to, whether it was in Bet Talmud or Bet Midrash, they didn't have the chops to make it all the way. So they got to go fishing. They got to go take on a trade. So where Jesus subverts things, so we focus on the fact that the disciples left everything behind to go follow Jesus. That's not the mind-blowing thing. The mind-blowing thing is that Jesus sought them out and he said, you come and follow me. And they're like, heck yeah, they would go home and tell their parents, guess what? Freaking Rabbi Jesus just invited me to be a Talmudim. And the parents were like, oh, thank God. I thought you were a failure. Like,
yeah, it sounds like if like Tom Cruise showed up and said, come do a movie with me,
Exactly.
Mission Impossible.
Yeah, like it's a big deal. So you would go through these phases, and that's what was laid out. And last thing I'll quickly say on note, and then there's different areas we can go in from here. But that also gives context because, again, a mistake we make is when it talks about how the disciples of Jesus, it talks about how they were ordinary men with no special training. We think that means they're just these uneducated hicks who didn't know anything. And that's why God can use you too. And you can start preaching to the world and going into all but you need to understand that even a Jewish citizen, a Jewish man who had no special training still probably had at least a graduate's degree worth of knowledge and experience and expertise compared to the everyday ordinary Joe when it comes to the Bible. So even though they had no special training, they likely had nearly, if not all, the Torah memorized. They knew most of the scriptures. So they had no special training, but their ordinary training was like our equivalent of like the Navy SEALs of knowledge.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, they just didn't go to university or get a master's or whatever.
Exactly, but these suckers were dangerous right where they were. So that's this system. So the system that is being that is being established. Yes, there's a lot of teaching and education that's happening, but a few things that stand out is the goal isn't to just get you to know the right stuff. It's to shape your story and to shape your worldview. Because again, what are they doing? These are people, they don't live in the land. They don't, Israel is not this great nation. They're not like, oh yeah, I'm in America. No, they are in oppressed territory with all of these other nations and powers and states over them. Yeah, here's your little sliver of land, but you got Romans walking the streets at that point. You got like this is a mixed bag of culture and society. So they're not just teaching them a history lesson. Again, we think of learning history as we are Americans. We're sitting in class, you read the Constitution, here's the Civil War, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, whatever, on a minute. I guess it's important to know my history. No, they are grounding these people in their worldview, in their cultural identity and narrative. That's what they're stewing in. And as they're doing that, they want to teach them how to think well, because the belief is that they are creating a ripe environment for Messiah to come. Because as they return to fidelity, as they create a culture of people that will live out the real Jewish identity, that will know Torah, that will be observant, that will follow the ways of Yahweh, that will not capitulate to cultural pressure, they believe God's going to raise up a Messiah from that group of people. So all of this is being done, first of all, to show fidelity to Yahweh, to show him, hey, we know we screwed up, we know we messed up, but you are still our God. We're still going to follow you. We're still going to serve you. Look at us, even in the midst of all of this tragedy, we're still going to continue to raise up a generation that will follow you, that will know you. And we're also creating the cultural milieu, a ripe environment for Messiah to come. Because when Messiah will come, he will restore not just natural order, but cosmic order. We want Messiah to come. And what's funny is they were creating the ripe environment for Messiah to come. Yeah. It's just that, unfortunately, for many of them, they missed all the implications of it, but they still did it nonetheless. So this is what's happening. And in order, and the last thing I'll say, and you guys can give some feedback, and then from there, we can take this different directions. We can wrap it up here. However you guys, I know we covered a lot, but however you guys want to go about it. One of the beautiful things is that whenever Talmudim reaches the highest level and their master is pleased with them, and the rabbi feels as though they've learned everything, what the rabbi does is the rabbi performs a ceremony where they now bestow the ability on their Talmudim to be a rabbi that can now go make disciples. So what we see happening in Matthew 28, it is the ceremony. It's Jesus telling his disciples, you are now ready to now go and make disciples. You can carry this. So they've made it through. And it's the passing on. Their rabbi is now passing on to them. I'm proud of you. You have done well. You have remained faithful. You have learned my teachings. You have learned my interpretations. You know my way of life. I am now entrusting you to now go carry this and make this way of life known to others. But here's the difference. This time, though, you don't get to go be your own rabbi who makes your own disciples. No, this time, what you're going to do is you're going to carry on my teachings and my yoke, because your responsibility is to teach them what I've commanded you. You don't get to go now with your own interpretations, your own thoughts, your own philosophy, your own way of life. Because if a rabbi did attain that level, that was kind of a part of like the appeal, is that the rabbi had these unique interpretations, these different ways of looking at the text. There was some debates against the different schools. There was the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. This is right before the time of Christ. There's like these different ways of looking at things and interpreting things, and the rabbi would pass that on. And then if you became a rabbi, you kind of got to like come up with your own little cool ways of reading this and interpreting that. So what's cool is that Jesus gives the ceremony to his disciples. However, he tells them, but look, I did it perfect. There's nothing to improve upon. I am Torah. I am Word made flesh. I am the perfect embodiment of living this out. So there's nothing to improve upon. I'm bestowing you to go and make disciples, but your responsibility is to teach them what I've commanded you. You don't get to go make up your own stuff. So it's this beautiful picture, and you go do that to all the nations. So now they're going and they're declaring the teachings of Jesus, the way of life of Jesus, to bring back all the nations to worship Yahweh, the one true God, and live in covenantal faithfulness with him. And that is what's behind the making of disciples.
Gosh, dude, that's so rich and so good. If you're listening to this episode, start it over, and take notes. Like, you have to get this kind of stuff. We've got to get this kind of stuff in our heads and our hearts to really, really, dude. The scripture just hits so much harder when you know the background. It's, man.
Yeah, I had several thoughts. They're not all necessarily connected, so I don't know if this helps or not. But first of all, what you were talking about, the model of learning by debate and by discussion, and then the idea of the midrash. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. And like when we read the Paul's letters, this is how a lot of his letters are written. There's people think it's confusing because he sounds like he's contradicting himself, but he's writing in a debate format. He's saying, well, did Christ die so that I can go on sinning? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I saw a funny video on Instagram the other day where somebody was doing like what it must have been like to receive one of Paul's letters, and she was like, the things that I want to do I do not do, and the things that I do want to do, and it's just like read this whole passage, and it's like it really does sound ridiculous when you think of it, but this is the model. He's arguing with himself, and he's saying this is the truth. So again, that's
and real quick, because I want you to add just, this is a real quick thought. You start seeing little things too. Like, this is why, like, when Jesus is like saying things and people are asking him questions, oftentimes, like, they're not like being resistant, or they're not being difficult, they're not being pains in the butts. Like, they're actually engaging in learning. Like, that's how they're learning. And another practice that they would do is you would get into like a question asking match. It's almost like a rap battle, but you would keep asking questions, and whoever couldn't outdo the other question, not answer, but outdo the other question, you lost. So that's what you see. Like, so Jesus is actually engaging in Jewish practice whenever like the Pharisees are like, who gave you this authority? And they're talking, and again, they're talking about, like, when they're talking about authority, they don't just mean like this supernatural authority. It's like, hey, you're going around as like this rabbi, but you, like, who gave you this authority? Like, who are you connected to? Like, I want to know, like, your pedigree. Your rabbi? Like, who's your rabbi, dude? And like, do you have authority from natural authority or heavenly authority, right? Because he's subverting all of these things. So Jesus is like, let me ask you a question, right? And so then, like, he's engaging in all these little practices. Anyway, it's really cool when you start noticing that. Keep going, man.
Yeah. So well, awesome. The other thing is the idea of midrash, and if I understand right, that basically just means like to give commentary, or to try to expound on an idea.
Explain.
Yes. And it, what's interesting to me is how nowadays everybody wants to take the Bible very literally, whereas their view of it was like what Paul's doing in his letters is giving commentary, and to interpret a passage from the Torah or whatever a certain way doesn't mean he's making up his own stuff. Like, he could say this is truth based on what we all know, and people would be like, oh yeah, that's a story we all know, So again, not necessarily related to the discipleship idea, but the educational model. This comes out in the biblical scriptures, in the biblical text, and as modern people, we don't see that structure. We don't understand that structure, and even like the book of Enoch you mentioned, the book of Jubilees, some of these things, people will argue, well, they're not valid because they contradict something else I see in the Bible, or they're making things up, and it's like, that didn't make it not true to them. That it's commentary. They're taking their national identity and their religious belief, and they're putting it in a format where people can accept it or digest it, and that's when, because I've been reading the book of Jubilees, and I've been telling Josh about it, and there's things in there that are not necessarily aligned with things in the Old Testament, but it's like, this was an idea they had, so they're giving this commentary. It doesn't mean it has to be like, if I go back in time, that's how it happened. That's what they believed, Exactly. So anyway,
they intentionally, it was a part of their values too. Also, like, I forgot, I can't remember if this is the Mishnah or the Talmud, right? Because now it's in written form. But there's like this Jewish writing where there'll be passages of text, and then in the margins you'll see the commentary. It's like debating these ideas and these thoughts. Yeah. But then at the end of it, it's like the debate just kind of comes to an end with no conclusion of like who's right.
Next.
Yeah, it's just, but again, we're so like when I read a Bible commentary, that person's writing that commentary, like, let me tell you what this means, I'm letting you know. And again, obviously, there is some people want to take that and think that, oh, in that case, I can just make crap up. There's no rules of interpretation I can do. And what's also interesting, they're also not doing that either, right? It's not this this free for all where you can just do with the text whatever you want, come up with your own morality, your own identity, your own way of thinking, your own way of, again, it's just a very different way of thinking and approaching things. And there are actually, Heiser mentioned this, I can't remember the book. So this will kind of be like a worthless throwaway point. But if anyone wants to know about this, it's worth exploring. In one of Heiser's very first Naked Bible episodes, he talks about how, whenever we're reading the scriptures, and you mentioned how Paul will reference something from the Old Testament, but when you get into you look at the passage, you're like, I don't think it's saying that, or it looks. He goes, some people just want to go to one side, a lot of the charismatic Pentecostal side, and be like, oh, that's a spiritual interpretation. But there's actually an interpretive principle that Paul's implementing, and people just don't know it because, again, we just don't know the culture. So there's a book that Heiser mentioned, and again, I can't remember the book. So if anything, I just want to put the thought in someone's mind that the way they approach the text, while it's wildly different from how we approach the text, but there's still a grid that they're leveraging. It's not just this mass free for all, when it comes to stuff. But we hate that because it's well, but what's right? What is right?
Yeah. That's cool. I don't know.
Even just the little thing you were talking about, how Jesus subverted. And that's something we would never think he was subverting anything because we don't know the background of it. But him going and picking his disciples and telling them to follow him, just that little bitty detail, shows his servanthood, and how he lowered himself to humanity and came to serve, and just that's so good.
And it also subverts a little thing too, we talk about how Christ came and into total obscurity. It's dude, Jesus became the rock star of his day. He was a rabbi. That's the highest status you could attain. Everybody knew who this dude was. And again, so we read and we see because everything about the gospel narrative is foreign to us. So we see their way of life, the itinerary, way of living. You're going from village to village. You're teaching people. You're leaving behind everything to go and follow this rabbi. And again, we just put the whole thing as a life of faith. But that's just literally what Jews were doing. And this is why then you start thinking oh yeah, because it talks about how John the Baptist had disciples and they were just hanging out with him, following him. And then the Pharisees had disciples too. And they're all just following them around and you just realize the reason why people are welcoming them into their homes and the crowds are gathering is because, again, this is just a part of the cultural milieu. It's how they lived, right? So that stuff's not standing out to them. It's these other things that are standing out to them as they're reading it.
Yeah, they're on that note, in one of the recent Divine Council Worldview podcasts, I don't know if you listen to that, but Mike Chu and Dr. Ron Johnson, they were talking about baptism and how baptism was not something Jesus made up or that John the Baptist made up. It was something that people did to show I'm joining this movement, oh, who, what team are you on, basically, kind of like Josh was saying earlier. And so this idea of baptism, being baptized into Jesus, just meant oh, I'm a follower of Jesus. That's the system that I've signed up for, and if somebody switched sides, they hypothetically, I guess, would get baptized into something else. But
Didn't some of those disciples have a quarrel with John the Baptist, going to Jesus? Were they followers of John, and they're we're going to go follow Jesus now?
Because John the Baptist was baptizing people, so he had followers. And then Jesus comes along, and John's now he's baptizing people, and they're well, what do we do? No, let him. So, and speaking of baptism, you mentioned that cultural identity and how, again, it's impressive that they can keep it over 800 years. You would think after 800 years, they'd be what's an Israelite? What's a Jew? Exactly.
Yeah.
And, but they had their teachings, the oral tradition, and they had some writings. They also had the traditions. They had, circumcision and Passover. And these are things that you see kind of, taken over in the New Testament, where they start saying, well, now let's baptize people into the name of Jesus. Or we don't circumcise people anymore, we'll baptize. Or instead of Passover, we have the Lord's Supper. So like and I was having this conversation with somebody recently that Christianity is a Jewish cult. Like that's how it started. And if you so if you don't think of the things that we do in that context, like, a lot of it doesn't make sense. It just seems like weird traditions we've made up.
Yep. So, a lot of secular sources, if you start just let's say you're just trying, they're not necessarily antagonistic towards Christianity or anything. If you're just studying just secular sources on history during that time, as they're breaking up the Jewish people into different sects, into different groups, one of the groups, they call it the Jesus movement. And again, like when we think of the Jesus movement, we think of like the thing that happened in like the 70s, like
the Great Revival.
But like for them, it was like, like there was this Jewish sect that they believed that Jesus was Messiah, and like they did stuff and they followed these things. They didn't follow these other things, and they lived this certain way. And it's deeply it's deeply Jewish, which that then opens up a whole other category, because where things start getting interesting is when the disciples are making disciples of other Jewish people. It's like it's a little bit fast tracked because they can build on a shared background knowledge that's already working. Where things start going off the rails, and this is why we get most of the New Testament, is what then do you do when you start converting pagans and you start converting Gentiles, and these people do not share the story? They don't share the narrative. Removed, they don't understand. So things start getting very complicated, because just when you're dealing with, again, Jewish people, you can kind of fast track story, which is why Paul is such a pivotal character, because he is someone who likely engaged with the Hellenization and the Greek schools in the gymnasium, but he also went through the process of being a disciple. And so that's whenever he talks about how he studied under, however you pronounce it, Gamaliel, the different ways. But when he's saying that, he's talking about like his rabbi. That's the guy he was following. That was his rabbi.
Yeah.
And so that's why Paul's this really great figure, because he is able to kind of bridge some of these gaps. But then this just becomes a whole issue with the early church. So even when you move beyond the New Testament, you get into the early church, and the early church quickly just becomes dominated by Gentiles, like even down to the leaders, down to the people that are the church fathers and everything. The Jewish influence is gone almost within like the first 100 years, right? So it becomes interesting when now the church is trying to figure out, how do we make disciples when these people don't share that background knowledge and that background story?
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I appreciate that Ron Johnson talks about is, he's one of those guys where it's like, let's start with Genesis. Like that's like, let's begin there. Yeah. And there's so much truth and validity to that, because like, as people are coming to the faith and they're becoming Christians, we start them with like, an epistle. But again, what is fundamental is knowing the story and grounding yourself in that identity. Like that is what's pivotal, and everything has to branch from that. So I think like, when someone like is a new convert or whatever, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like, here's an epistle, whatever. Like I'm not demonizing anything. I just, my heart is to say, how are we shaping the story that lives in their head? How are we rewiring the narrative, the identity, the belief, like those core beliefs, that they can look at themselves, like look at the world in a very different way? And then that's where we kind of start building better some of these practices, but they have to be built on the right story. Because that's foundational. And that's what was leading to so many of the issues in the early church. Yeah, people were learning about all the practices, but they kept marrying these practices with the wrong story. And it was just causing all of these issues left, right, and center. And so that becomes one of the big things that the early church wrestles with for many, many, many years.
Well, so makes me think, was the Areopagus one of those gymnasium settings?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if it was a gymnasium setting. It seems like it was a place of just more like broader public discourse. Dialogue and conversation, I think. Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to contribute to what you're saying, is that Paul, you kind of were saying like, we see Jesus or the disciples as these brave figures for leaving everything and living on faith or whatever. But we kind of see Paul as like this brave character for going and debating with these people. But that's what he would have done. Like,
Yes.
right? That's what you're saying. That was the normal practice.
Well, I was also thinking about the philosophy, because they were really heavy into philosophy, and then the worship of gods, having the statues, and Paul addressing those statues, how they were put together, how their philosophy, their politics, their government, the way they thought about culture, everything was all melded together.
Yeah. You know, an interesting thing, now you guys bring up Paul, you know, one of the things that's interesting about the whole concept of being disciples and making disciples, it's interesting. The term disciple is never even though Jesus said, go make disciples, the term disciple never shows up in the Bible once you get out of Acts, never shows up again. And part of the reason, and again, I don't think this is a problem. I actually like how Paul's approaching this. Part of the thing is that these letters and these writings are going heavily to Gentile people. Again, they don't know what that means and what that is. So the language that Paul starts using more, talking about Timothy, he doesn't say Timothy is a disciple of his. He says Timothy is a son, and he's like a father. Because to the Jewish people, that was a better parallel of understanding the relationship between the rabbi and the Talmud. It wasn't a relationship of teacher-student. It was more like the relationship of father-son, even like in one of the Jewish legal writings, which I can't remember the source, but it talks about how, like, if your father is in prison and your rabbi is imprisoned, you get your rabbi out first because your father brought you into this world, but your rabbi gets you into the world to come. Wow. And so there was like such a premium that was placed on the rabbi. That was what the relationship was a lot like. It was like a father and son. So when Paul starts dealing with non-Jewish contexts, he shifts the language from a language of rabbi Talmudim or rabbi disciple. And now what do you see all throughout his letters? Father, son, children. He's talking like that because to the Gentile audience, that's the closest parallel that they can map on to understand that kind of relationship that Paul is wanting to emphasize in these contexts. That's a little interesting trivia point, that it's like Jesus is like, go make disciples, and they carry this on, and the term never shows up again. Like once you get out of Acts, like it never pops back in. And instead you get a lot of father, son, my dear children. That's the language you start getting instead.
That's interesting.
And then, you got sons of God, that we're the sons of God in the New Testament, echoing back to...
Yeah. Well, and then this is Jesus, like this is Jesus's divine counsel, if you will, right? Because because Yahweh, he chooses Israel, but then he disinherits the nations and he puts them under the rule of the sons of God, but then they end up, many of them rebel and stuff like that. And so the nations are disinherited, are put under the leadership of the sons of God. But then Jesus then gets these disciples and he's like, hey, go preach to all the nations. And the other interesting thing too is you talk about like the table of nations. There's that discrepancy, like some translations say 70, some say 72.
Yeah.
But same thing when you read in one of the Gospels and it's talking about like the disciples of Jesus. He doesn't just have 12. It talks about he has 70, or some say 72. It references that. So there's this literally direct parallel to the table of nations and the disciples of Christ, and him telling them, now go proclaim to all the nations. So then that's why when you get immediately what happens, Jesus says, wait, the Holy Spirit's going to come. Holy Spirit comes, tongues come. And what's Pentecost? Again, you guys have probably covered this a million times. Your audience already knows, but it is the reversal of Babel, right? It's the languages are coming together. The people are uniting. They're hearing the praises of God come from all different. So it's crazy. It's like, oh my gosh, it's all here. Like it's all freaking here, man.
And to those that are nerds in like video games and movies and all that, which we're all into that stuff, like that's the Easter eggs. Like that's the stuff that that's in the Bible narrative. That's what you're looking for. Like when you watch a movie, a Star Wars movie or whatever whatever you're into, and you're like, oh, I remember, that references back to that. Oh, there's that thing, like that's the Bible, dude. That's the first Easter egg narrative that you can hunt through right there.
So what maybe to wrap this up, you can give a little your idea on this. What does it look like in the modern day 21st century America, or I guess wherever, Europe, wherever? What does it look like to be a disciple? Because again, we are kind of given that idea, that it means to like have a mentor almost.
Yeah.
Like in my head, I kind of joked earlier about having somebody controlling your actions and telling you what to do. Like some people see it that way. Like the Baptists have this idea of the armor bearer, that follows the pastor around, and so like what would it look like? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, actually, that is the application, and I'm releasing a book right now called Armor Bearers. I'm looking for a few. So if anyone's listening and you want to be my armor bearer, that's actually the crescendo.
For 3 easy payments, so $2.99.
Yeah, exactly.
Tahe's looking for followers.
Below. Dude, so a few things, man. I think that I actually think where all of this starts, and this is kind of the thread. This is the thing I need to thread, because I think there is undeniably a communal aspect to this. Like undeniably, there's a communal aspect to what Jesus ideally is laying out for what the church is to look like and to be like and to feel like and to live like. However, there is also this reality of following Jesus, and also what does that mean and what does that look like? So I'll thread it, and I'm sure people always find things to be upset about, or even
you're
if
gonna
people
offend
come
somebody,
to slightly different. Yeah, exactly. Like talk about lightning instead of fire, and all that stuff like that, instead of a tornado of fire. But here, my biggest thing with people is like, I think what's most important, take from the principles that I'm laying out as far as spitballing on the application. You before the Lord, figure out what that looks like. Now I'm going to give my take on it, but I'm just letting other people know if you disagree with any point of this, you're welcome to, right? Like I'm not the arbiter or the expert in this. Like you've mentioned, I'm now wrestling with what does this really look like on the ground day to day. I think first and foremost, we do have something that many of the early church, the early Christians did not have. And that is that we do have the life of Christ that is written for us to read, to study, to learn. We have Bibles, right? We can read these things. We can learn these things. So in my mind, when I'm hearing this, my priority is not go run off and find a mentor, go find someone who you can go walk around. Because remember, the heart of this, and this is where people get the application wrong. I think Paul nails it when he says, follow me as I follow Christ. Where some people want to go make disciples unto them, and they want to teach others all that they obey them. Remember, making disciples of Jesus. So one of the windows that we have that many of the early church, for the majority of it, did not have, is we have direct access into the life of Christ through the Gospels, through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the first application that I think anyone should take from this before you try to go run off and sign up for a group or become someone's armor bearer is embed yourself into the life of Jesus. And of course, all the scripture is good. All the scripture is great. But if we were going to be practical and like, hey, I want to know what Paul taught, then you should focus on reading the writings of Paul. If we are talking about, I want to live like Jesus lived, I think there's something beautiful about it, like wrapping yourself in the story of the gospel and the gospels and working to further uncover a lot of what this podcast is seeking to do, which is to help embed people in the worldview and the mindset of the people at that time, at that day. We only talked about one aspect of the gospels and getting under it in that cultural context, which is making disciples. This is all over the gospels. There's all kinds of things Jesus is talking about and referencing and referring to that we are missing. So that's my first encouragement to people practically, is wrap yourself in the life of Jesus, the values of Jesus, and bury yourself in the gospel. Because the more familiar you get with the life of Christ, because again, I do think ideally there's a communal aspect to this, but you want to, just like we talked about, what do disciples do? They're not sponges. They're vigilant. They ask questions. They think critically. They think for themselves. They know how to debate, not to rebel, not to be resistant, but because they want to be faithful to Yahweh. You want to wrap yourself in the life of Christ. That way you are told to, if this ever does cross over into a relationship with someone, you're able to hold that standard and to recognize what's there, right? You're able to step back and go, now, hold on, wait a second. Hey, I'm, learning from you. This is great, but you're currently saying something, doing something. Help me reconcile, because you're saying do this, but Jesus is doing this, or you're living like this, but Jesus lives like that. You're treating me this way, but here's how. So first and foremost, bury yourself into the life of Jesus, because again, I've said it 1,000 times, while there is going to be a communal aspect, you as the disciple, you do not write off your mind. Jesus's disciples didn't do that. Again, sometimes he'd get frustrated with them, but they felt the freedom to debate with him. They felt the freedom to push back, to ask questions. They felt the freedom to do it. So do that. And as you're burying yourself in that whole world, it's going to naturally lead you to, if I'm burying myself in the life and the values of Jesus, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to realize, wait a second, when Jesus is in the wilderness and he's being tempted, every time he quotes, he's quoting out of Deuteronomy. Well, frick, if I want to be like Jesus, I better go learn Deuteronomy, right? I don't know. Maybe you go memorize Deuteronomy, right? You know, it's like, cause it's going to connect you to the whole narrative. It's going to connect you to the whole Bible. So I think that's step number one, embed yourself there. I would say then step number two, and this is where things can get a little bit difficult. I think most people don't know what this looks like and how to live this. And most people aren't really giving it. And so I would not expect somebody to go up to their pastor or whomever, a church leader, and to be like, hey, like, I want to like follow you around and do like, because most people, even if you tell most people, I want you to disciple me, their application is going to be great. Let's get coffee once a week and, do a devotional. Like that's how most people are going to interpret it. So I love Hebrews. This is what I would tell people to do. I love in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7. It talks about, consider, the honor. It talks about like the teachers, those who teach you the word of God, but it talks about those who teach God's word among you. And it says, consider the outcome of their life and imitate their faith. My encouragement to people is, of course, be connected and invest yourself into a local church, a local community. We'd have to do a whole episode on what does it mean to find one and to look for one, all that good stuff. But let's just hope if you're in one, my encouragement is find a local church. And instead of getting too caught up in the entrapments of like, they have this structure, this group, this criteria, this thing, there's something about being a disciple, making a disciple. I believe at its root, it's organic. And so what I would consider people to do, wrap yourself into the life of your local church and just look for people that are a little bit older than you, a little bit more mature than you, a little bit wiser than you, that you just naturally resonate with. Like you just want to be around them. It's not because they're a small group leader and you go to their small group. It's not because they're a leader and you're in their section and you need to submit to their authority. It's not because of any of that stuff. Okay. Like if some of that's there and you want to honor your church, that's for you to work out. My broader thing that I think applies to anybody, because not all churches have that. Not all churches have small groups and small group leaders. And here's our criteria and our structure. And these are our delegated authorities that we've implemented. Like a lot of churches don't have that. Mm-hmm. So my encouragement to people is just find a church, go to a church, wrap yourself into that community, and just look for those that you connect with and resonate with and just get around them. Like, don't even try to formalize it. Don't even try to be weird. Don't even try to be like, I want to sit under your yoke and learn the Bible. Mm-hmm. Just do stuff like go to their homes, have dinner with them, invite them to your home. Because again, that's where it happens. What the disciples were doing, they weren't just looking for Jesus to exposit the scripture to them. They wanted to see how Jesus talked to people, how Jesus loved people. So the best way, like if I'm discipling someone, the best way that I can disciple somebody in marriage isn't to like sit them down and to take them through a marriage book or teach them marriage principles. Or if it's like being a father, the best thing I can do isn't to like walk somebody through a book on being a dad and giving them dad tips. The best thing that I can do if I want to disciple someone in being a father is just to be like, hey, come hang out at my house and just watch me be a dad. Because what's really going to impact you is what's going to impact you is what the 5 principles I teach you at a coffee shop, or you coming to my home for a dinner and you just watching how I interact with my daughter, whether good or bad, whether it's me losing my temper or loving her well, that's going to matter more. So my encouragement to people is in your local context, try to find those that you just naturally resonate with. And again, don't make it weird. They don't understand the Rabbi Talmudim model that we just got done talking about for an hour. They don't know what Bet Sefer and Bet Talmud, they don't know that stuff. So don't like go to them and, hey, listen to this podcast. And after you listen to it, I was wondering if you could take me through your version of Bet Sefer because I want to know your midrash and I would like to, don't do that. Don't. And I want you to have a ceremony.
Well, no, we want them to listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
And then
Yes,
and then
yes.
you can talk about going to their house and having dinner and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So please let everybody know about the podcast.
And we're
episode.
trying to push your YouTube channel too.
I'm sorry. Let everybody know about it. But again, my application with people, I think you guys are getting the heart behind this. My application to people is you don't even have to bring up the term disciple. Because again, Paul never uses the term disciple. He never says it. He never uses the term. Now, I'm sure he may use it. I just mean like in the text, right?
Yeah.
It's just father and son. It should happen now. There should just be relationships that break the grid, break the mold. Look, I was a part of a local church that there was all of leadership and hierarchy and submission and authority. And the man in my life who I feel like I have that relationship with, I was never in we went to the same local church, but I was never in his small group. Yeah. He was never my leader. He never was any of that stuff. I just connected with him. There was this connection that was very natural and organic. So then the last thing I'll say then, because not only are we to be disciples, we were to make disciples. I say the exact same thing in how you deliver this. Honor your local church. You know, they got structures and stuff, you know, try to follow them, you know, as much as you're able to. But again, don't like go find a bunch of people and get all weird about it. And like, I want you to be my Talmudine and I'm going to, you know, disciple. No. Dude, just like who are people that you can then also help in their journey? And you should just be helping people anyway. And as you're just helping people, I promise you what's going to naturally develop is as you're just serving people, loving people, caring for people, there's just going to be individuals that there's just going to be a natural resonance for. No one's being weird. No one's having some formal conversation. No one's doing anything odd. It just naturally what ends up happening. You start texting a little bit more. You start hanging out a little bit more. You go catch a movie together. Because as someone who's making disciples, the best thing you can do is like what Jesus did. You get this thing ingrained in you. You embody Jesus. And then you just live your life. And they're going to see how you are when you're talking to the cashier at the grocery. Well, everybody does self-checkout now, so not the cashier at the grocery store. But, you know, other places where there's humans that we still talk to. They're going to just see your life. They're going to see how you interact. They're going to see how you live. They're going to see how you love. They're going to see how you mourn. They're going to see how you grieve. They're going to see how you break under pressure. They're going to see you fail. They're going to see you ask forgiveness. They're going to see you pray. They're going to see you. And like, they're going to see that lived out naturally. So that's my encouragement to people. So in summary, I would encourage people, wrap yourself into the life of Jesus. And that's going to naturally then get you to get into the scriptures and understand that as you're reading through the gospels, you are like Christ. I want to see your life and I want to reflect this life. I want to live like you. I want to be like you. I want to follow you. So are you leading me anywhere today? Is there something you want me to do? Something you want me to say? Someone you want me to be? Who am I becoming? You fall in love with the life of Christ. See that be embedded into you. Let that get into the broader story of who you are, your identity. As you wrap yourself into a local community of love, and you're in your local church, look for those that you consider their way of life, and you look at their faith, and you're like, I like that person. I just like them. I just want to be around them, and just get around them, hang out with them, and just watch them, observe them, learn from them that way. Ask them questions. You know, if there is something that comes up, ask them questions. How do you do this? How do you do that? And then same thing, just serve people, love people, and then lean into the relationships that you have natural resonance with to, you know, walk with others. And it just helps everything not be freaking weird.
Right.
So that's my application.
It takes the pressure off too. Like that people don't feel like they have to go through this crazy structure and hierarchies and I have to do this formal invitation. No, you just be a nice, loving person and help those around you.
Well, because think about it, man. Like the most formative conversations of your life most likely didn't happen at a small group, didn't happen at a church round table. The most formative moments of your life with other people likely just happened as you're with someone that you love and that you trust. There's been no formal articulations of friendships or best friendships. There's been no, agreements made or signed, no memberships. And you just end up staying up until 1 o'clock in the morning and you start leaning in, you start asking questions, you start giving advice. Like those are the most life-changing, impactful moments. I have a friend right now who's going through a severe tragic loss. They are walking through a stillbirth. And technically it's like a miscarriage because it happened right before the only difference between a miscarriage and a stillbirth is when it happens in the pregnancy, not really how it happens or anything like that, just when it happens in the pregnancy. So technically a miscarriage, really a stillbirth. But I've been through 2 miscarriages. I've never been through a stillbirth, but I've been through 2 miscarriages. And so, dude, for the past like 2 weeks, it has just, and he's known that about my story and me going through that. That's why I wear these 2 bracelets, is for the 2 babies we miscarried. And so as he and others have just come to me and opening up and are sharing things and are just kind of showing their hearts and are bleeding and, you know, stuff like that about what's going on. Again, there's nothing like weird or formal or like it is just life is being shared, inputs being given, advice is being, you know, given as well. And I think also, since we are not Jesus, the humility to learn from others, again, like the ones that, even if it's someone that you are discipling, it's someone that, let them debate you, let them ask questions. If they're not asking questions and challenging you, like, and if they ask you a question, then like turn it back on them. Well, what do you think about that? Right. Like, and see how they're thinking. And so, yeah, I just think things that we can do to take the pressure off, let it be so much more just organic and natural. That would be, again, are there instances and situations and circumstances and contexts and nuance and denominations and structures? Yes. But I think what can apply to anyone is what I've shared. I think that applies to anyone. There might be some contextualization you need to do, and there might be some unique instances that God leads you to. There might be someone who God puts on your heart to be more intentional with, to have a more formal conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think what I've laid out is just a good principle that most people can apply and it not get weird.
Yeah, don't be weird is a pretty good moral for this show.
Absolutely.
But yeah, until you start talking about the Giants.
I was gonna say sometimes it gets weird.
Exactly.
Sometimes it might get a little weird. Yeah.
Bro, we talked about aliens and dragons.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's perfectly fine. Then you can get as weird as you want, man. But yeah, I think emphasizing that relational investment and not like informational exchange is what is paramount, dude. So like just relational investment, like showing people, and that and again, that's why everything for me begins with the life of Jesus. Like, because all of this, it should, in a sense, not that you don't need to be intentional, but to a sense, as you tune yourself and as you cultivate awareness of this stuff that we're discussing, to some extent, there should just be kind of a natural kind of outpouring of it, if you will. Again, I think there does need to be this awareness, this alignment but once the awareness is there, and I think as you wrap yourself into the life of Christ, I think a lot of this stuff just kind of starts happening naturally. I'm sure the 2 of you guys have other dudes in your life that like you never had a formal weird conversation, but they're texting you, they want to be around you, they want your input, they want like, and again, like no one said anything, but like you're literally, that's what you're making decide, like that's what you're doing. And there's probably other people in your life that you gravitate towards their wisdom, their life, their maturity, their stability, and you just like you gravitate towards them. So yeah, man, I think that's a great place to start. And then just, there's a few books, you know, and I'll send you guys more links cause I'm just kind of kicking these books off the top of my head, but there's like a book, it's, Anna and Louis, I think Tverberg. I don't know how to say it's like Anna something, Louis Tverberg, but they have great books. It's like Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus, Walking in the Dust of Rabbi Jesus, reading the Bible. It's all about understanding the first century Jewish context. So I'll give you guys all of my sources. You can put it in the links. Anything I've shared today, I am not some scholarly expert who's working with primary sources and piecing all of this together. This is all other smart, brilliant scholars that I am reading, that I am learning from, and I'm just simply packaging the information to share it to an audience that I'm connected with. And so none of this is at the effort of my own painstaking research. So I'll give you guys all the resources because these are all other great wise men that I'm learning from, and I'm making their information available as much as I can through things like this. So, and my YouTube channel that I'm not updating at all. So
yeah.
We're
So everybody go check out Tahe's one video.
Yeah, share your YouTube. How do people get in contact with you? How do they follow you?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
your gaming domain that's taking over YouTube.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about your other channel.
I know that's what you guys are going to see from my second video. It's just going to be me cutting the 2 of you out of like everything I've talked about.
You got a free episode.
That's right.
It'll feel like a little weird because you'll be like, is he talking to someone? But I don't see them.
That's what Paul did. That's what Paul did. You just
yeah,
right, you're just talking to yourself. It's fine.
Exactly. So yeah, if anybody wants to stay connected, the YouTube channel that they keep cryptically talking about, which again, it's all my fault because I haven't updated it. But it's called Making Whole Disciples. And so not whole as in HOLE, not like a hole in a donut, but whole as in holistic.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that it touches, all of life, but also it whole for two reasons is because what it means to be a disciple goes beyond just spiritual formation. It impacts our whole life, but also the whole speaks to doing it in a healthy way and not in a way that's controlling and manipulative and weird and gaslighting and, just you overstep your boundary and you are not helping people and following Jesus. You're trying to make worshipers of you. So that's like some of what I'm playing into it with that term, but it's Making Whole Disciples. That's the one video on YouTube. And then if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, I'm mostly posting like marketing stuff because I also do as far as a business. You can follow me on Instagram. Tahe Governor is my name, which you'll see that. But the other thing they're talking about, which, this really, if any of you by chance are into Let's Play gaming YouTubers, I actually do have a gaming YouTube channel. And that is what I am most consistent with updating and pouring my time into.
Oh, you're one of those gamers. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So if any of you are listening to this and you're like, I love Let's Play gaming YouTubers, you can check that out. Actually, my name is Shonen Disciple. And that just speaks to the shonen part of it speaks to, I also love anime. I'm a big anime fan, big anime nerd. So I always tell people the biggest influences in my life, the way I say it as a joke, is Goku and Jesus. Goku just representing all of the anime influences and all of the battle shonens and things I've watched, and Christ being my faith. And of course, Goku's first for a reason and Jesus is second. No, I'm kidding. My YouTube channel, it's called Shonen Disciple because it speaks to that. But yeah, I do Let's Play gaming YouTube stuff, so you guys can go.
Well, Tahe, we'll have to definitely have you back on and talk about more stuff for sure.
I had so much fun. Seriously, this was awesome. I had a great time. I really appreciate you guys. I love what you guys are doing. It's so important. Keep doing it. Take it from someone who has made one episode for their YouTube channel. Don't give up, guys. Don't give up.
We're here to stay, man.
Stay the course. Yeah.
And we do little episodes where we invite people to come chat with us sometimes. So we'll put you in our rotation. Good night.
See ya.